St. Louis, Missouri is one of the major cities in the state of Missouri, located along the Mississippi River on the state line of Illinois. Known popularly as the Gateway to the West, St. Louis is home to the Gateway Arch, a 630-foot iconic monument to honor the explorations of Lewis and Clark. St. Louis is home to several tourist attractions, such as the City Museum, Soulard, the St. Louis Zoo, and is home to several breweries like Schlafly and Anheuser-Busch, as well as home to the St. Louis Cardinals. As of 2014, the population of St. Louis was 1,001,876 people. Of that population, 69.9% were Caucasian, 23.9% were African American, and 6.2% were considered other. One of their iconic locations, Delmar Boulevard, is where the city begins to divide itself. Delmar Boulevard is the dividing line between the two vastly different neighborhoods in regards to both socioeconomic and racial backgrounds. This one street creates a divide in the median value of homes, ranging from $73,000 on one side and $335,000 on the other side, and divides the median household income, ranging from $18,000 annually to $50,000 annually. Why the divide? In 1917, the U.S. Supreme Court ended residential segregation, but even today, bankers and realtors still try and divide the line by driving Caucasians and African Americans into different neighborhoods on opposite sides of Delmar. This racial divide in St. Louis has caused the issues of racial bias and stereotyping to remain a problem under the radar, and wasn't taken seriously by many. On August 9, 2014, however, that all changed. On August 9, 2014, in Ferguson, Missouri, 18-year-old Michael Brown of Ferguson was shot and killed while unarmed by Officer Darren Wilson of the Ferguson Police Department. It was reported earlier that day that two African-American teenagers had robbed a convenience store in Ferguson, and according to video surveillance, the two teenagers looked to be Michael Brown and friend Dorian Johnson. At around noon, Officer Darren Wilson stopped the two teenagers for jaywalking. This occurred after being briefed via police radio of the theft of several packages of cigarillos at the Ferguson Market and Liquor, where the convenience clerk identified the two teenagers as wearing the same clothes and having the same stature as Brown and his friend. As Wilson tried to confront the two teenagers, according to the official police report released by the Department of Justice, Wilson, as well as other witnesses, stated that Brown reached into the open window of Wilson's SUV police vehicle and punched and grabbed Wilson, which led to them fighting for possession of Wilson's service weapon. As Brown tried to flee the scene, shots were fired at the 18-year-old, and evidence from autopsy states that the fatal shot that ultimately killed Brown was in the head, where his body was positioned as running forward. This contradicted several witness testimonies, which stated that Brown was fleeing the scene, but ultimately surrendered and turned around, stating that he was unarmed and told Wilson to stop shooting, where he put his arms up in surrender and Wilson then fired the fatal shot. Ferguson is a primarily African American community with an overwhelmingly white police force and government. The events on August 9th led to many cases of both violent and peaceful protesting. Many members of the community expressed their outrage of the situation by protesting peacefully downtown at the government building, but some other members of the community didn't want to follow that same path. Several instances of vandalism, arson, theft, and violence broke out that night, leading to several places of business in Ferguson to be broken into, looted, and even burnt to the ground. The rise of violence in the city led Governor Jay Nixon to declare a state of emergency and imposed a curfew on Ferguson, closing the streets from midnight to 5 a.m. The events that occurred in Ferguson over the course of 2 weeks led the country to begin to have those talks about the underlying racial bias and stereotyping present in American society. It led many people to question, where do we go from here? How do we solve these problems? Is there a problem to be solved? As a resident of St. Louis, Missouri, the events in Ferguson made me wonder if the problem of underlying racial bias, stereotyping, and prejudice was a problem in other communities. Issues of racism and bias have hit several cities around the country since, such as Baltimore, Brooklyn, and Orange County. As I began to delve deeper into the subject, it made me wonder, how does racial bias and stereotyping affect Millikin's campus? This led me to wonder, could these incidents of racial bias happen at Millikin University? As I began my research through interviews and reading articles, I began to explore this question, and thus begins my adventure to look deeper into the interracial climate of Millikin University. Millikin University is a small, liberal arts college located in Decatur, Illinois. Millikin University is home to approximately 2,200 students and varies in fields of study from the performing arts, to business, to nursing and sciences, and to professional studies. Millikin was founded in 1901 by James Millikin, and today is ranked among the top schools in the Midwestern United States and in the country. Dedicated to performance learning, Millikin students have the opportunity to dip their toes in different aspects of their education and to prepare themselves for employment after graduation. Millikin is a predominantly white institution, where more than half the student body identify as Caucasian. As of the fall semester of 2015, the makeup of Millikin student population is 74% Caucasian, 13% African American, and 13% other, which include Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and those who identify as multiracial. What's more surprising than those numbers is the racial diversity and makeup of the Millikin University faculty and staff. The racial makeup of Millikin's faculty and staff is 90.8% Caucasian, 3.9% African American, and 5.3% other. With such a drastic difference in the racial makeup of this university, it's no wonder that some students feel that Millikin isn't always inclusive to their minority students. Does the racial makeup of Millikin come into play when it comes to the interracial climate of Millikin University? Before we can delve further into this topic, it's important to look at the pre-campus background of our students. In a survey sent to about 100 students, 84% of those who answered identify as Caucasian, 9% identify as African American, 4% identify as multiracial, and around 3% identify as other. According to the survey, around 74% of those who identify as Caucasian graduated high school with a class that was composed around 75% or higher of the same racial background as themselves. On the other hand, only about 14% of those who identify as African American graduated from high school with a class of the same racial background. This data shows that African American students of Millikin came from a more integrated background, whereas the Caucasian students came from a more segregated background. How does this come into play with the interracial climate at Millikin University? Why is it important to study this aspect of the background of students who answered these surveys? With a look into the backgrounds of the students, it's easier to see how exposed they are to cultural and ethnic diversity. If students come from a more segregated background, they haven't been exposed to many opportunities to learn about a different culture or ethnicity and see how important integration is to having a culturally and racially inclusive community for students. In order for inclusivity to have an effect on the student body, it starts with the students themselves. In an article by Anthony Lysing Antonio entitled Diversity and the Influence of Friendship Groups in College, students of similar ethnic and racial backgrounds tend to self-segregate themselves with a term called balkanization. Balkanization is when students of similar races or ethnic backgrounds group themselves together on campuses to establish a sense of unity and support. This idea of self-segregating oneself can be harmful to the development of racial tolerance on many college campuses and can result in racial tension, bias, and stereotyping amongst the different racial and ethnic groups. Millikin University offers many opportunities for students to get involved in several aspects of everyday college life, from Greek life to clubs and organizations focused on academic fields and to clubs and organizations that promote diversity. Millikin University, according to their website, is dedicated to creating a diverse campus population, fostering a campus atmosphere where diversity is valued, and generating a campus learning community that embraces diversity. With this mission statement in mind, there are several organizations dedicated to promoting diversity amongst our students, with clubs such as the Black Student Union, the Multicultural Student Council, Brothers Moving Forward, the Asian Student Organization, International Student Organization, the Latin American Student Organization, Sister Circle, Multicultural Voices of Praise, and several multicultural Greek organizations, such as Sigma Lambda Beta Fraternity Incorporated, Sigma Lambda Gamma Sorority Incorporated, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Although Millikin uses the Student Involvement Fair in the fall semester at the beginning of the school year to give the opportunity for organizations to promote themselves and reach out to the community, many students are concerned there's no prevalence of the importance of these diverse student organizations, and many students feel that it should be required by the university to include into first week a presentation on diversity groups on campus and their importance to the interracial and culturally inclusive climate that Millikin is trying to offer their students. With all of these opportunities to get involved in diversity-based organizations on campus, the next question that needs to be asked is, does the student population of Millikin University actually take advantage of these opportunities? According to the survey results, only about 8% of those who answered said they were involved in an ethnic or minority-based group here at Millikin. That means that over 90% of students who answered this survey are not involved in these groups, which includes members from each racial background that answered. Are these results due to a lack of knowledge of the organizations? A lack of desire to be involved in them? Many people have said they aren't as informed about the groups as they wish they were, so where does the problem lie? With all the research that has been done to study the effect of racial bias and stereotyping at Millikin, it made me want to overall answer a few simple questions. Is there a prevalence of self-segregation on campus? Are self-segregated friend groups influential or harmful to the students' development of racial understanding, cultural awareness, and interracial interactions within Millikin's community? Is racial bias overall a problem at Millikin University? Going back to this term of self-segregation, I wanted to see if this term was being brought into practice by the students at Millikin. Through the survey, I asked students what the overall composition of their inner and outer friend groups were in regards to racial makeup of the same racial background as themselves. According to the survey results, approximately 83% of students who identify as Caucasian said that their inner circle of friends, their closest 5 or fewer friends, were composed of 75% or higher of the same ethnic background as themselves. As well, around 72% of those who identify as African American said the same thing. This shows that students at Millikin University like to surround themselves with those of the same racial background as themselves, and shows the tendency for students to self-segregate themselves by racial backgrounds. Why do students do this? Is it because of their living situation? Is it because they don't feel comfortable around members of other ethnic groups? It's hard to say for certain, but through the data collected, it's easy to conclude that the students are beginning to self-segregate themselves on campus. Another element to look into to determine self-segregation is the makeup of the outer circle of friends, which can include the organizations one is involved in, Greek life, academic department, so on and so forth. According to the survey, about 70% of those who identify as Caucasian said their outer groups contained 75% or higher the same ethnic background as themselves, while the survey shows that only 43% of those who identify as African American said their outer circle contained 75% of the same ethnic background. That means 57% of those who identify as African American are part of outer circles that contain less than 50% of the same racial makeup. This is most likely due to Millikin being a predominantly white institution. As seen through the media within the past few years, there have been several instances of racial tension and issues of racial bias being brought to light through the media. Many of these instances take place on college campuses, such as Mizzou, Yale, UCLA, Clemson University, and so on and so forth. With the suppressed racial tension on campuses, it has led to protests and violence on several campuses, and many people can say that this could be due to no outlet to discuss issues of racial tension on campus. With the proper tools, the issue could have been resolved, and Millikin has several opportunities for students to voice their concerns about these issues. The problem is, do students take advantage of these opportunities? If they don't, could Millikin be next in the media? Another term that often came up in my research was the idea of cultural sensitivity, and how it comes into play in creating a general campus climate that fosters respect and acceptance for all students of any culture, race, or ethnic background. Cultural sensitivity can be defined as being aware that cultural differences and similarities between people exist, without assigning them a value, right or wrong, positive or negative, better or worse. Therefore, cultural insensitivity can be defined as a lack of knowledge or disregard of someone's social norms, cultural norms, or cultural background. It can also mean that people don't care about, respect, or understand other cultures, and sometimes don't have the desire to. This can be a problem at Millikin University because even though the school is predominantly Caucasian, it still has a large pool of students who come from a very diverse and culturally rich background. And these norms of their cultures and ethnicity come into play in their everyday lives. If we aren't sensitive and respectful to their norms, this can cause a tension that will cause students to want to self-segregate themselves, to feel more comfortable and at ease with their backgrounds. In the survey sent to students, there were several opinion-based questions about the cultural climate at Millikin. The first question asked was if they had discussed racial issues with someone of a different ethnic or racial group. According to the survey, 75% of the Caucasian study group answered that they have, but only 14% of the African American study group said they have. Does this mean that more students who identify as African American aren't comfortable talking about issues of race with non-minority students? Do they feel that campus is culturally insensitive to issues of race? Here's what some students had to say about what they think of the cultural sensitivity or insensitivity on campus.
I guess the thing of college is that you come and you find a second home, and if you don't feel comfortable, it's hard to focus on classes. It's hard to feel included. It's hard to stay engaged with the campus life and the campus community and everything if you don't feel a sense of belonging. And so, if people are insensitive or feel like they don't care about certain aspects of who you are in your life, then it's hard to really trust people or to really feel comfortable around them. So I think, just like anyone who doesn't feel like they belong, it's hard for them to focus. It's hard for them to really grow in an environment.
And you feel that that affects Millikin's campus?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with anonymous things like Yik Yak, where there's so much racism and so much discrimination that people don't take seriously, or people just like are constantly seeing. It's like, who's saying this, and the fact that like you come to Millikin, it promotes like diversity and all these things, and you like feel like, okay, I'm coming to an accepting and open environment and campus where like I can be myself and be accepted, and then you see things on social media and you're like, whoa, like I didn't expect this, and so you're like just in a sense of shock and in a sense of like, maybe I don't belong here, so it just really catches you off guard.
Absolutely.
I think it's really divided. I haven't had my own, well, obviously because I'm white, I haven't had prejudice against myself, and I think that in the theater department and in most of Millikin as well, it's about 74% white, so sometimes those things don't often come up as much with faculty. I do know that there are specific faculty members that will fight for it, that will push it. Like, for instance, Tom Robson in the theater department has a class for, African American studies and tries to push diversity on campus, whereas we've had some other people who have tried to slightly divert against that. When there were issues coming up with cultural sensitivity and cultural appropriation and production at Millikin, when we spoke to the head of the department, there were a lot of things being said in the meeting that were just a little bit like misinformed and coming out with good intentions, but in the end really ignorant. And so I don't think with the teachers I've experienced, I don't think there are any that are purposefully trying to be culturally insensitive. I think they are culturally insensitive because there are some things that they don't understand.
I think it can be like most recently seen in just like the comedian that we had for the pancake breakfast last night. Apparently she was really insensitive and like and it made a lot of people uncomfortable to the point where they would like leave. And then I got on Yik Yak this morning and like everyone was being like, oh well, everyone's just too sensitive and everyone's getting mad over something that like isn't anything. I'm like, no, it really is. like you can't just invalidate an entire group of people's feelings just because it doesn't affect you. Like, you aren't allowed to tell them that they aren't being oppressed. like,
Right.
I think that it makes so many underrepresented students just not feel included. A lot of times we find ourselves offended just because other people are ignorant of, history, knowledge. They're just not educated on certain things, and so they may do something or say something, and they don't even realize how, we're being affected. And so I think in the end it just really leaves us feeling ostracized and kind of helpless at points too, because we don't know how to react to certain things.
It's prevalent, but it's not necessarily as outward as we would think. Okay, so I would suggest that cultural awareness, or awareness of any type, but specifically cultural awareness, we need to be proactive instead of trying to chase, the wagon down the hill. We need to be more aware. We need to be educated on that, and specifically on personal biases. Everyone has them, but we just really don't want to take the time to admit, for whatever reason, that they're present. Mm-hmm. So I notice it. Of course I notice it.
The survey also asked questions about whether or not students have experienced or witnessed racial or cultural insensitivity from students or faculty. According to the survey, approximately 80% of the Caucasian study group has witnessed or experienced cultural or racial insensitivity from students, and 86% of the African American study group has witnessed it. As well, the survey also shows that 86% of the African American study group has witnessed or experienced racial or cultural insensitivity from faculty or staff, while only 20% of the Caucasian study group has. With a predominantly white institution, it's easy to see how students could feel that the student body and faculty and staff of the university could be insensitive to minority students. Here's what some students had to say about how cultural insensitivity comes into play by both the student body and the faculty and staff.
I think that some are and some aren't. Luckily, with my department, which is psychology, we learn about that type of stuff all the time, so I haven't experienced that in my department. But I do feel like that there are you know, certain departments, certain faculty on staff that don't understand historically the significance of some of the things that they do and how we may be affected by some of those things.
However, from the professors that I've had, when I felt, you know, like if I had a question and a professor didn't answer it right or just, you know, kind of said it in an aggressive way, then I've talked to them about it and they apologized and said, you know, I didn't mean it like that, you know, I just kind of said it. So I feel like the professors are more than willing to listen, especially here at Millikin being a private institution. You know, they get really personal with you. I mean, I'm pretty sure for Elijah too, professors here, they're very active in your life if you want them to be. So as far as my experiences with professors, I feel like they are sensitive if you bring it up to them. But if not, they're not going to know.
So I think overall, there's a really good sense of security. Like I think, well, I mean, personally, I think I could go to any teacher here and be like, hey, I'm not okay with this, and they would listen, at least. And seeing as I'm not a minority, like that doesn't mean a whole lot, but I think the security is there, that it can be approached. I'm not sure how well received it is at times, because I've never encountered that.
I definitely think there are some that like you can voice your opinions and they're like accepting and understanding and like try to do whatever they can to help. I think it sometimes doesn't go past I understand where you're coming from, and I think that's why there's a difference between like, yeah, they're culturally sensitive and like they'll listen to you, but as far as like actually taking steps and taking actions to like make the situation better, I feel like that's where they can definitely improve on. Especially, and then there are some who like just honestly just don't care. You know, there are some who just like, and I think a lot of it is just they don't understand the severity of the situation, or they just don't quite understand, so it's hard for them to know what to do or what to say. You know, because they don't get me or because they don't understand me, they like kind of throw it off, or they just like get offended because I say like, you don't know what to do with me, or like you don't know what's helping me, you don't know, like you can understand but you really don't get it, like, you know, and it's really uncomfortable too, like not being represented in the faculty, like having a person of color to be like, you actually not only understand what I'm saying, but you've been in my shoes, you know exactly what I mean, and like you have a better understanding of how to help me out and how to, you know.
Like in society, I think that most are, but I think that I'll speak for myself in the fact that it's a daily learning moment for me to be not only culturally aware, but aware period as a human being. And what do I mean by that? I may say something because of my white privilege that I think is normal, when in fact it's not normal. For example, if someone were to come to me and share an experience or whatever the case may be, it's very easy for me to, why didn't you call me? I would have helped. Instead of saying, oh, that's terrible, how may I help you? You tell me how I can help you. And if not, that's okay too, you know. It's presumption that I wasn't even aware of, see. Until it's very easy to come out of your mouth. So we must be aware on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely terrible. I think that we are a very segregated community, and I think that's mainly due to the fact that we have a lot of people from like segregated communities, whether it be in St. Louis or Chicago and from suburbs. And even people from small towns, say they're from a small town in Illinois or Indiana, never really experienced other cultures, and they come to Millikin and they are around them. And they don't really know how to deal with that. So there's this very hush-hush attitude. You have people who put a smile on and they try to just kind of ignore things, and then they'll go on Yik Yak and say things. Or, I mean, really, I don't really see cultural diversity unless it's with, like, for instance, the Betas, a multicultural Greek organization, or, like, that's really about it. Like, people just kind of divert off into their little friend groups and then will blast everything on Yik Yak or on Facebook and things like that.
Do you think self-segregation and friend groups is a problem on campus?
Totally. Not just racially, but when it comes to like gender identity, when it comes to religious views, when it comes to even majors. People will do that with their own majors. I think Millikin is extremely segregated, and it's not super surprising when, I'm not sure where the statistic came from, but I read that St. Louis is one of the most segregated cities in America. I mean, you have the North St. Louis and you have the western suburban area that is all mainly one color. So
I think that it's very tense right now, especially since there's pretty much kind of the same thing going on at so many different schools, as we've been seeing in the media lately. So I would say at Millikin, it's especially leading up to the forum, I felt just a lot of tension in the atmosphere in general. But fortunately, I do feel like the forum helped to alleviate some of that tension, you know, because we got a chance to educate, people shared, and we talked about, you know, how we felt and why certain things were offensive to us and why certain things were okay. So I'm hoping that in general that will help to affect the overall climate of Millikin.
Absolutely. What would you say is a contributing factor to the poor interracial climate at Millikin?
I think I'm definitely going to say ignorance and a lack of knowledge, and then also resistance on some ends. I mean, I understand that we all make mistakes. I'm sure we've all offended someone because we didn't know something or we just weren't aware. But I think it's the resistance to gain that knowledge and to become an ally and to listen in general is what really kind of contributes to the tension here.
I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it on Facebook. I feel like people just, you know, they have their opinions and you can't really force or make someone not make a status or make someone post anything. They're going to post it whether you like it or not. I mean, it's very coward of them to do it, but as far as affecting other people, I think it just, as for me, I kind of just like, well, obviously they're being ignorant towards interracial couples or ethnicities.
I would describe it as strained. I think there's a lot of backlash from anonymous people over stuff, and that could be like 5 people that are posting all those things, but like the fact that they're still being posted is really frustrating. Because I think a lot of times people around here are really open and accepting to that, because I mean, like, it's basically a liberal arts school. So, but I think it's strained for sure because there are still a lot of people coming from more rural towns around here that are still really unaware of the problem itself. And like, personally, I think it can stop being talked about when it's no longer a problem, but it still is. and I don't get to decide when it isn't a problem anymore. Like, I'm just an ally at this point. Like, I don't get to decide that, and so I'm going to keep advocating
right.
Until it's no longer that.
Mm-hmm. We lack. We're not diverse. I don't care what anyone says. We're not diverse. And if this gets me in trouble, so be it. If we were diverse, we'd have a truly diverse faculty that felt at home. Further, we would have a truly diverse student body that felt at home, that could say things, sing things, present things without an influx of overreaction or fear. We would be able to have those hard discussions without backdoor conversations or whisperings or I didn't believe that person said that. We would have true dialogue. So I believe that we have a lot of work to do. I believe that we should be more inclusive. I don't think that the individuals with whom we have dialogue currently, you know, what do we fully understand? Well, we fully understand that we understand nothing.
It's definitely an undertone. It's definitely a sense of like, either people just don't care, or people will say, oh yeah, I understand, but it just stops there. There's no like real action or like goal or anything that goes further than like a conversation or like I get it or I understand. And there's a lot of people who just swear up and down, oh I'm progressive or I'm with it or I'm with that or like, you know, and it's black and white. Like, I've had conversations with black people who are just like, I don't think there's any more race problems, or like, I have this and that. I'm like, how can you be a person of color and not realize all the things that's going on around you? Not just like white people, but it's like black people, people of all different cultures are like sometimes just really unaware of what's going on around them.
So what would you say is the biggest contributing factor to the poor interracial climate in Millikin?
The fact that people don't want to talk about it, the fact that people would rather like just ignore the problem, or like or also the fact that it stops at a conversation. It'll be like one person saying this is a problem, and they'll just be like, okay, yes, this is, but no action gets taken. No, and it's also a lack of wanting to understand other people different from us, because it's like we'll have like it's like people who know about the problem are the only people to talk about it, so they all just agree with the problem, they know it's there, but nobody outside of the problem, or if the problem that doesn't affect them, they don't really care for it, they don't want to learn about it or understand it, And I think that's why a lot of, like, nothing really happens, because it's just all the people with the issue coming together, like, this is an issue, and we're like, yeah, we know, but people who are part of the issue, or people outside of the issue, they're not saying, hey, maybe I'm part of the issue, or hey, maybe I should learn about this issue. And I think it's also a problem that it's turned into like not a competition, but it always seems like a battle or like a confrontation thing. It's like, no, we're not trying to fight you, we're not trying to blame you. It's just like you need to educate yourself, you need to be aware of what's going on, And so I think people are so scared that if they're called out for being ignorant about something, they feel so attacked, and so they're not going to want to put themselves in that situation to learn, to better themselves, and so they don't get anywhere because we're so afraid of being wrong, and we're so afraid of like being attacked, or we're so afraid that if we're called out on doing something that it makes us a bad person, it makes us feel like we're bad people, when it's not the case. It's like, I can't be mad at you and I can't blame you for like not knowing about something, but once you do know about something, then it's your responsibility to like call it out, and to like, and it's also just really hard to get those walls down that people have, to be like, this is what you think, it's not okay, let's work together to fix it, And so it's like navigating that behavior, like navigating that conversation, like trying to peacefully and respectfully and professionally, reach toward progress, because it's just like, people are just so sensitive, people have these walls, and people hate feeling like they're a bad person for thinking a certain way or believing.
Students in the survey were also asked their opinions on whether or not the campus community of Millikin University fosters a culture of respect, and whether or not the interracial climate is positive or negative. According to the survey, 93% of the Caucasian study group agreed or strongly agreed that Millikin fosters a culture of respect for their students. Meanwhile, only about 57% of the African American study group agreed or strongly agreed. The difference between the two groups is staggering, and it shows that many students who are categorized as minorities don't feel that Millikin's campus is respectful of minority groups or inclusive to the students. The survey also shows that in regards to the interracial climate of Millikin being a positive one, only 28% of the African American study group agrees that it is positive, while 81% of the Caucasian study group agrees that it is positive. Students at Millikin University are unhappy about the interracial climate at the school, and many students, faculty, and alumni of Millikin want to know how it's going to change.
This is our moment. This is our time to shine. This room right now is filled with people who came here on behalf of you, to hear your concerns, to hear the issues that you have, to hear what you have to say, and the changes that you would like to see implemented on this campus. I just ask that you really take this opportunity, because it is a golden one. Use this chance to bring to light the issues that we discuss in those conversations amongst ourselves behind closed doors every single day. We want you all to speak up, to speak out, to be brave, to be honest, and to let your voices be heard. As Black students, do you guys feel like we're included at Millikin?
No.
And why is that? Now with first week, I'm a senior now, super senior, but I do remember my freshman year, my experiences during first week, and personally they were not memorable for me. They were not particularly enjoyable either. Some of the activities I think were just kind of fun all around. There was a magician, there was a few other things, but there was nothing culturally focused that really made me feel like, wow, like this is the school that I'm going to be attending. They're actually attentive to my interests as a black student and as a student of color. I'm really excited to be here. That's not how I felt. I felt like, wow, I'm coming into a school where there is a lot of white people, and I feel like I'm going to be attending a lot of different events that don't really cater to the things that I'm interested in and the things that I like and the things that I want to see as a student of color on this campus. And this is just one example of the many things that we go through on this campus as black students all the time. And so we got together with other black students on this campus and we said, guys, it's time for us to come together, to stand together, to speak up and to speak out about the things that go on this campus concerning us every day. And it's time for us to demand that something be done about it.
There was an incident that occurred between her and another white student, and at the end of the class, she pulled her to the side and told her, don't come to class the next period. A couple of weeks roll by, I'm in class, paying attention. She says a remark to me, and I'll be honest, I gave a remark back. But she told me to leave the classroom in front of everybody. So I went to talk to her at a different occasion, and before I could even say anything, she says, I know you're angry. Well, why do you feel like I'm angry? Because I'm supposed to be an angry black woman? That's not the case. I want to talk to you and let you know that wasn't okay. Because you treated someone else differently and I was just booted out in front of everybody. That's not okay. And even then, she couldn't explain to me why that wasn't okay. In her mind, that was okay to do so. And it bothers me that we have some faculty who have those views. And if that's the case, if you have those views, don't voice it. Keep it to yourself. Because that makes people look at you differently, not want to come to you for help. And just your connections around you. It is very, for me at that moment, I had never experienced anything like it. So I was like, oh, like, what just happened? And you know, I had a lot of peers who always said, well, this has happened to me, this, and that. And I had never had a connection. But when that happened last year, I was like, okay, I feel for every single person who has had a situation that has happened to them.
In some of my comm classes, it is a lot of racist comments that float in the air that faculty members do hear and do not speak up on, and it makes me feel uncomfortable knowing that I'm a communication major. I am not the only African American student in my class, but when we speak up, I'm already given off, I'm the angry black woman. But when faculty members or professors have the opportunity to speak up and say, you know, that is offensive, I wouldn't like that energy in my classroom or whatever, it shouldn't be surprising when we have racist comments floating around on Yik Yak, but you don't speak on it in class. Yeah.
We're not asking for more. We're not asking for you guys to look at us as if we're better. We're asking for equality. My man said he's been looking for that for, what, 30, 40 years now? 50? There's no reason why I'm speaking solely on the black male, because, you know, I'm not even as involved as I used to be, but every time there's a problem, the black students, the black males come to me and ask me what would I do or what should they do. I'm not even I'm still involved, but I step back a lot because of my own personal experiences with Millikin. Millikin has made me a better man, but at the same time, it has molded me into a man that doesn't want to be that inclusive with it, because I don't feel like I belong. And that's not to say anything bad upon it, it's just they don't include us. And that's the reality of it. Even when, unless you conform to what their image of you should be or their culture, you step away from yours, you're not seen the same way. I can walk into a classroom today and have on a tie and I have on a suit, and most likely they're gonna try to talk to me. They're gonna ask me, you know, hey, how's your day going? You know, what you do last night? If I walk in there like this, with a skull cap on, or if I take my glasses off, Lord forbids I let my dreads down, then they're gonna look at you as if, oh, why are you here? And sometimes I just feel like on this campus, professors and students forget that just because we're black doesn't mean we're not students. Like, a lot of black men come here and don't understand. We don't have a lot of positive images. And that's not because we can't be positive images. It's because when we come to a place like this, you guys don't give us the chance to be positive images. Yeah. I came here, I'm not gonna lie, I came here like being that stereotype. Broke away from it and was still treated as if I was that stereotype. So what does that go to say to the black man when he realizes that no matter what you do, you're still that stereotype?
It was during those times and times before me where black students were only looked at as appropriate because we were athletes. Okay? And we were treated as such. The only time that we got any consideration of anything on this campus was because we were basketball players or football players or we ran track. As long as we were doing things like that and winning on the field for the reputation of the university, we were fine. But the minute that we got fed up with some things and started to talk about some things, it wasn't like that anymore. We were then looked at as radicals. If any of you know the word radical, it was said and mentioned many, many times towards black people in the 70s. If you spoke up on this university back in 1972, you were looked at as a radical. You were ostracized. You were given the eye. You were watched. And we went through those things in the 70s. I will say this to you, I was never so glad to graduate from this university. I will also say this in all honesty. This is the first time I've been back to Millikin University in some 35 years. Wow. We still have the racism. We still have the looks at the corner of people's eyes. We're still being watched because we're of a different color, of a different creed, of different thinking. And those things, I thought, and I'll say that I had a dream when I was 18 years old. I said, racism is going to be gone by the time I get old. Well, I'll tell you what, I have not had to be pinched because it's not. It's still here. I'm still fighting it at the age of 61. I shouldn't be, but I am. My children are fighting it. My grandchildren are fighting it. You all are fighting it. Why? Because somebody doesn't want to change their thinking? Because somebody doesn't want to be sensitive enough to consider you're a person, not a color? But these things still go on. We have to get together and talk. Thank you for the forum, because this gives us a chance to do that and to listen. And not only do we have to talk and listen, we have to take action. Action without expedience is no good. And we've been saying that for a long, long time. 1976 is when I graduated. It's been 39 years since I graduated from this university. And still, we have the same problems and the same concerns. When does this end? Students on campus now, please listen to what I'm saying to you, because I can guarantee you 4 years from now you'll still be facing the same thing.
Back in December of 2015, the Millikin Melanin Movement on campus held a forum to discuss the issues and to create a call to action for the school to address and fix the needs of minority students. Here are some of their demands.
We demand a written diversity statement approved by a panel comprised of students of color that Millikin will uphold the best interests and the success of its diverse student population and be posted on the Millikin website. We demand that there be a mandatory orientation facilitated by the Black Student Union and different culturally focused organizations funded by the Office of Inclusion and Student Engagement for all first-year students during first week. We demand that more funding and allocations be awarded to culturally focused organizations to be able to accommodate for the cultural experience of different ethnicities of students throughout the campus. We demand, as demanded in 1968 by members and allies of For Soul Only, for a facility to house Black organizations, activities, events, and to create a feeling of home through sense of community and belonging before the year 2007 and reside under our priority.
We demand that Millikin University creates and enforces comprehensive racial awareness and diversity curriculum throughout all campus departments and offices, made mandatory for all students, faculty, staff, and administration. This curriculum must be scrutinized, maintained, and overseen by a board comprised of students, staff, and faculty of color. We demand that Student Senate and University Center Board, UCB, be required to work in conjunction with culturally focused organization on all university events. We demand that Millikin University increase the percentage of Black faculty and staff to reflect the percentage of Black students enrolled at the university by May 2018. We demand that by spring of 2017, Millikin University constructs a focused 5-year plan which will increase retention rates for Black and African American students, maintain diversity, and promote an atmosphere of inclusivity.
We encourage students, faculty, and staff to allow the response of Millikin University and its officials to mold your perception of how this institution truly values and upholds the needs of their diverse student population, academically, socially, and culturally. We encourage every student of color to fight for a college atmosphere which will allow them to be confident in their ability to excel in their uniqueness at a predominantly white institution.
Since the Millikin Melanin Movement Forum, the university has taken several steps to try and create a community that is inclusive to their students. For example, President White created a Commission of Inclusive Excellence that contains both faculty, staff, and students to work on creating a more inclusive community on campus. Some of the efforts that will be made by this new commission include expanding the diversity amongst faculty and staff, creating forums that discuss the issues as they face campus, and so on. Although they seem small, the university is making giant strides to trying to become a more inclusive community for all members of the university, regardless of cultural, ethnic, or racial background. With students being more aware of these issues, those involved in this commission can help improve the campus climate for all students, making Millikin greater than it already is. Many of you may be wondering, what is the purpose of bringing these issues to light through this documentary? This documentary isn't meant to pick apart or offend anyone in Millikin's campus about how they contribute to the interracial climate at Millikin. This documentary is to bring to light these issues that sit in the shadows at Millikin and aren't discussed as often as they should be. It's also meant to help those who don't understand these situations learn what the problem is and why it's an issue. This documentary will hopefully be a starting point for students and faculty alike to take these issues and use them to begin discussing these issues more effectively. Hopefully with this new insight, students and faculty can help make Millikin a more culturally and ethnically inclusive community.